Hey everyone. Just getting sound levels checked. Good, that's good. 10's probably fine. 10, yep, we'll do. How are you all? Yeah, good. Week 3, surviving. Yeah, who's going to drop the course? Is anyone going to drop the course? Too invested now? Okay, that's fair enough. Well, I hope you're chugging along okay. Welcome, friend. Just before we get started, thought I'd chat just a little bit generally about things. So obviously, assignment 1's due this Friday, which you should all probably know. Assignment 2 is due next Friday. I'll tell you about this in the notice at the end of the week, but just as a reminder, assignment 2 is really small, okay? Now, I just want to get your head into the right gear with it. With assignment 2, because today we're obviously doing this lecture on NodeJS. We're essentially learning a bit more about JavaScript. It doesn't have a great deal to do with assignment 3. We talked about that just at the end of assignment 2. We talked about that just at the end of last Tuesday about how this is kind of a little bit it's super useful for postgrads, kind of revision for undergrads. It helps kind of complete the picture of web stuff. And it relates a lot to this NPM JavaScript ecosystem and whatnot. We'll unpack that as well. But the rest of the lectures that you'll learn this week, these ones here, WebJS, DOM, events, forms, local storage, that's all about JavaScript in the web browser strictly, right? So today's a lot of JavaScript in the terminal, which is important, but relevant for kind of week 7. We're just doing it now whilst it's topical. Whereas this other stuff here, web JavaScript, it is much more, geared towards assignment 2 and 3. So these pre-recordings here will be enough for you to go and do assignment 2. So you'll have to, don't wait around for the lecture, because next week's lecture is going to be on Thursday, and that's a day before it's due. Do you know what I mean? So don't wait for me to kind of emotionally pour my heart out on the topic of JavaScript to you. The pre-records are plenty. But when we do go through JavaScript next Thursday, we'll basically be ramping you up for assignment 3, right? Which is kind of the big hit. So assignment 1, I know it feels a little bit fiddly, but it's not been the hardest thing in the world, At least I hope not. It's been maybe medium hard, variations of frustrating, the mood. But assignment 3 will be the first time we kind of challenge you in this course. And even then, I still don't think stuff in this course intellectually is a 10 out of 10 difficulty at any point. So that's kind of the gist of it. Before we get started, is there any questions about anything high level, or does anyone want to share something they've learned about web development in the last week? Yeah? Oh. Sorry? Aligning shit sucks. Quote on, I didn't say that. I'm just quoting. Aligning stuff does suck. I have been working on a little website for the school recently to look after some stuff, which you guys might use later in the term. And I was battling a few of those things myself. I was this just feels it's diminishing returns feeling. It kind of feels I feel like I've learned it, but why am I fighting it? So absolutely, yep.
Right, so I just found out that we could just go to GitHub and get our own developer pack. And for anyone who's looking to, make a website after his own name, they shouldn't buy it or they basically get it for free from GitHub.
GitHub will buy a domain with your name for free.
Right, so basically, there's this program called GitHub Student Developer Program.
So GitHub Student Developer Program, yep.
Right, so when you enroll into that, they basically give you an SSL certificate for the HTTPS and also a domain, all for free.
Yeah, sure.
So I just thought that'd be interesting.
That's really cool. GitHub Student Developer Pack. Yeah, okay, cool. That's really good. I got asked a question a while ago, I think it was at the end of T2, where people were asking about domains, and I'm not going to go into it, but just for context here, let's say, what's your name? How do I spell it?
S-H-R-U-I.
Yep. What's your last name, if you don't mind me asking? Or is it
T-A-L-R-E-J.
T-A-N-R-E-J?
T-A-L.
L? Yep. A?
That's
Perfect. Or close enough. So, for instance, if my friend Shrey would like to go and get a website that is just his name.com, right? You can go and do that right now, and you can go, there's tons of websites where you can go and do this on. And you can go build a website on it later, But in this case, they're saying that you can buy it for 50 cents. It's very stupid how GoDaddy prices these. They say it's 50 cents, and then every year after that's $40, and you have to lock in a minimum of 3 years. So what they're really saying there is $80 and 42 cents or something over 3 years, and you can go and do that. So what we're talking about is like Shrey discovered the GitHub student developer pack, which
For the domain, they also charge you separately for the SSL certificate.
yeah, exactly. So you not only have to buy this, you got to buy something else to keep your website secure. And GitHub basically, it's like if you're a student, you get some free stuff. So check that out.
I
That's
actually made one of my own website.
you made one already.
Yeah, it's .me instead of .com. You can just get that.
I'm a developer.
That's a
I love it. So you're going to get 100 in assignment 1, right? Now.
That's a template, by the way.
That's a sample.
Yeah.
Okay, you didn't make that over the weekend.
I mean,
Maybe, yeah, okay.
I'll talk about it when I get my last assignment 1.
Yeah, cool. There was also another student. I'll have to do that at the end. They were working on a cool site. I wanted to show everyone that too. But this is a nice little nugget to get started. Obviously, if you have questions and stuff, post them there. I'm going to leave the Slido up for just 5 more minutes. So again, if you think you're going to ask a question today, go write that number down, 1793-227, and then you can ask a question later. So what we're going to be talking about today is Node.js. Now, one of the most important lectures in the course, in my opinion, is this one here, which is the JavaScript ecosystem. I believe, okay, logged myself out of the course website. We have some course website updates coming soon, actually, which should be fun. The JavaScript ecosystem, it's a pretty short lecture, and I'm really glad we fit it into 20 minutes. It's quite dense, right? Everyone watch that? Hands up if you haven't watched it. Be honest, just so I have a sense of it. So go watch it. No, it's all right. It's an important lecture. You will get more out of these if you do watch the stuff, but you're all adults, so I'm not too fussed either way. But what it kind of gets at is this really important idea that JavaScript is a language, right? And what happened was that people went and implemented it in 2 different places, which is the web browser, right, which is itself kind of a compiler, and they implemented it on the terminal in what we call Node.js. So Node.js is JavaScript for the terminal. The web browser is JavaScript for a user interface on the web. Now, that is really important because they're kind of the same and kind of different. We also, I don't think we talked about that this time. I think I'm just getting that mixed up with something. So you can kind of use your JavaScript knowledge to do stuff on the web and Node.js, but not all of it has total overlap. And it is really, really important because for a lot of the rest of this kind of next few weeks, we're talking about JavaScript in the web. So WebJS, DOM, events, form, local storage, even all of this stuff through week 4. And week 5 doesn't really have much coding. But like 3, 4, 5, it's all just web JavaScript, you know? However, the Node.js stuff is kind of important. And you might be thinking, why would I care about Node.js stuff? You know, like we're making front ends. We're not dealing with the terminal. We're not doing command line JavaScript. The reason it's important is because all of the frameworks like React and Angular and Vue.js and all of that, really weirdly, they are actually written in Node.js land. They're actually written kind of in terminal land, so you'll be like compiling them with the terminal and building them with the terminal. Even though you're still writing web code and running it on the front end, it's all done in Node.js because Node.js is significantly more powerful than JavaScript in the web browser. The best way I could explain it to you is like JavaScript in the web browser has been heavily the same for the last 20 years, right? And all these new technologies you've had pop up, they've all come up through Node.js. Because you know what? Whenever you see this stuff, like all these libraries, NPM and things, that's all in Node.js land. You can't import an NPM library and run it on the web browser. The web browser is super simple. It just runs very basic JavaScript code. So what that means is how all these frameworks like React.js and Angular work is that you actually go and build them in Node.js land, and they compile themselves down to really basic, boring JavaScript that gets run on the web browser. So we use Node.js to build stuff for the web browser. Obviously, a lot of that we don't talk about till week 7, but I might give you a little bit of a taste of that towards the end here, just to kind of give you a sense of it. But that's why we talk about it. It's not because we think you need to go and build servers with Node.js. That's not the point. It's because you need Node.js to build modern front ends. So you need to kind of get comfortable with the environment. That's why there's things like NPM here back in week 2, as well as the basics of JavaScript. Week 2 is pretty light, in general. There wasn't a ton there. But the purpose of today, we're going to do 2 short activities. One's going to be writing a little bit of JavaScript code. We're just going to warm you up into JavaScript land again. And the second part is we're going to make a little web server. Now, the purpose of the web server, again, is not to make you go, wow, you have to go and make web servers in this course. There's 2 purposes to it. One is that for assignment 3 and assignment 4, you will be given a web server. So we want you to understand what the hell it is, at the least. And then secondly, it's just useful to understand how Node.js and web JavaScript work together. So very simple question to start here. I'm just going to copy and paste it. We want to solve this problem here. We want to be able to read in up to 20 dates in the format YYYY, MMDD from argv, do stuff, do stuff, do stuff. So I'm going to go make a new file here. It's going to be called, mydate.js. Right, so again, this has nothing to do with HTML and CSS. You can totally separate out that knowledge for the moment. Totally orthogonal. Now, again, I know all of you here have experience with Node.js from undergrad, and you're going to skirt through this, or you have experience with Python in which you're familiar with the gist of it. And what I mean by that is, and I'm just going to be talking to the undergrads here, you know that you can write a file in Python. You can write a file called mydate.py, and you can put a line of code that says print hello, and you can run that on the terminal, right, with Python. You've all done that before, or something similar, I hope. We can do the same thing with JavaScript, where I can go inside my week 3 folder here, and I can say node mydate.js. When I run that, it runs the code. So that is JavaScript. It's the same JavaScript I could put in the web browser if I wanted to as well. I could open up the terminal here, and I could literally put it in my web browser. I could say console.log 1 + 2 like that, and it'll print it out. Right? So the web browser and my terminal, they both understand JavaScript. It's just one of them is they're just 2 different programs that work with it. And I'm going to go and write some more stuff here to actually try and solve the problem. I'm going to put these in comments to start. Let me just make this a bit smaller. Word wrap. Perfect. OK, so the first one is I want to read in up to 20 dates in the format YYY from argv. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to hop on Google, and I'm going to say JavaScript Node.js argv. Now, you'll notice that when I Googled this, I typed in JavaScript Node.js argv. This is something I think is actually really important, is that when you are searching for JavaScript problems to solve, I generally recommend that you write Node.js for Node.js stuff and maybe web for web browser stuff, because there is some JavaScript code that the web browser doesn't understand and vice versa. So I might also type in example, because that's not really giving me the best answers. How do I pass command line arguments? They'll kind of tell you here, they're like, OK, the arguments are stored in process.argv. I'm like, OK, well, let's see that. I'm going to console log process.argv. Then I'm going to run my code. And I can see that there's the program that's running. There's the file that I'm running. Children. Got 1, 2, 3 there, right? So there's my 3 argvs that are being passed in. Just like C, just like any other programming language, that's just like a shell bash kind of definition, argv. But again, what you'll notice is that if I go make another page here, and I'll call it page.html, and all I'm going to do on that page, I'll write some HTML there, hello. And then I come along and say, script here, console log that. If I go and open up my web browser and I put in page.html and I open this up here, I'm getting an error, right? It says process is not defined. Now, similarly, watch what happens if I console log window.height. Why is it not happy with me? Undefined. What am I looking for? Just window. Window is one of the big global objects in JavaScript. You'll kind of get more used to that. There's a massive object. It's got a ton of stuff in it, right? It's where you can get like the height of the window, the width of the window. You can figure out where you've scrolled to on the page, all those kinds of metadata associated with it. And similarly, if I go back to this Node.js land and I go console log window, what's going to happen is I'm going to get an error, windows not defined, right? And I'm just trying to, this is just really trying to reiterate this point. Both JavaScript, both kind of same syntax rules, but both have extra special sources that the other one doesn't. Node's got this process, Web's got this window, and there's another bunch of a dozen examples on both sides of that as well. So let's start with that. There's my process.argv. I only want from elements 2 onwards. Okay, well, what do? I could say, you could do this a bunch of different ways. I could make it really simple and say for I, let I equal 0, I is less than process.argv.length, because in JavaScript, any array, you can get the length of it just by doing .length. And then I could simply say, if I equals 0 or I equals 1, I want to skip over it. Now, that's a terrible way of writing code. That's a great, like, C-style type of code. It's very, complicated for JavaScript, but there we go. Nonetheless, I could still print out 1, 2, and 3, because I just skip the first and the second element at index 0 and 1, and then I get all of my dates there. So it says read in up to 20 dates. Okay, that's cool. Well, what's another way I could write this if I wanted to? Well, I know that the upper bound is going to be the maximum of either 2, right? There's either going to be 2 elements, or there's going to be the length of that, say. Maybe 20. Something like that, right? Because it's like, how many elements am I going to be able to read in? It's either going to be like the length of that argv, or it's going to be, I guess it's 22, right? Because you've got 20 argv elements plus the first 2. So I could do that instead, and then I could simply do a for loop slightly differently and say, you know what, we're actually just going to start from 2, and we're going to go through to the upper bound, and we don't need any of that. 1, 2, 3, and then it's like, oh no, well, we're getting that. I think that should have been a min, right? Whoops. I do that every day still. Does anyone ever get the max min thing wrong constantly? You're like looking for a big number, so you write max, but you actually meant the, or am I just stupid? Maybe a bit of both. So it's like, I've got my upper bound. I'm reading through that. I've got 1, 2, and 3. Now I can type it in normally and say, like, 2002, the 2nd of February, 2003, the 3rd of March, 2004, the 4th of April. There's my 3 dates that I'm passing in. Cute. Okay, so that first part's done. The next part here says, for each date, calculate how many days since that date have passed. So this is a good question, because it's like, well, since the 2nd of February 2002, how many days have passed? Do you know? I sure as hell don't. Is anyone here one of those people who just like knows that off the top of the head? Got one of those little mental arithmetic rules? No? Okay. Well, we need to figure it out. So how do you want to figure it out? Someone help me out. What's the first thing you do? Calculate today's date. Cool. What's that going to help you with? What are you going to do once you have that? Well, measure differences. How would you measure the differences? Sorry? Minus the 2 dates from each other? That could work, right? Well, I got to parse one. I got to parse it first, because it's right now it's a string. There's lots of things that go through your head, right? So firstly, JavaScript has a built-in date object called date. It's very confusing to work with. Developers generally lament it quite a bit. It's just kind of an ugly thing that's very counterintuitive. There's a few key things you can do with date. Firstly, you can do what I just did, where you do date.now. And what this will do is that will basically, like, date.now is now today's date. In this case, it's representing it as a Unix timestamp, which is a number of seconds since the 1st of January 1970. That's pretty standard with a lot of languages. You can also try and use date to parse something. So for instance, like here I'm printing out these argvs. I can also create a new date and pass this in, like that. Okay, and it seems to have done okay with it? Maybe? I think so. Dates are really confusing. You know, one of the problems with front end is we deal with them a lot. We also deal a lot with them on the back end. You can't really escape time when it comes to programming. You can see here that what's happened is we've tried to pass in this literally to it. There's no guarantee it would be happy with it in that format, but it does seem to be sort of happy with it. And you got to be a little bit careful here because, and I literally was battling this on the weekend with a thing I was doing, is like, when it comes to dates, the JavaScript date object by itself will generally represent things that when you try and print it out, it will represent things as UTC time. You know, I don't think we really have a part of the degree where we talk about this, but it's like UTC time is basically London time, which is like +0, because you know every time zone's got a plus element to it. So what happens is this computer has a time zone right now. The terminal infers it from the operating system. Your web browser infers it from the operating system. If you're on a server and the server's in the US, it will infer it from its operating system, you know, so all the times come from the operating systems. And in this case, it's like Hayden's in Sydney, so when I passed that date in, it inferred that that was the 2nd of February 2002 at the stroke of midnight in Sydney. Then when I went to print it out, what it's saying is, well, sure, but that's actually 1 p.m. on the 1st of February in London at that time of year. The reason for that is because 1 p.m. Sorry, is that right? 1 p.m. Now, times, man. That doesn't seem right. Because we should be what? 11 hours in February? That's also why this is different here, because I think it's probably to do with daylight savings. We should be 11 hours ahead, right? Stuff's so confusing. Then I don't get why that is that either. Very interesting. Not too sure. This could be a good use of ChatGPT. Never really. Sorry? Winter and summer? Yeah, no, 100%. So like when I first looked at this, I thought, well, this makes sense because Sydney's +11 in summer and then it's +10 in winter, right? And that kind of makes sense for this one. Like, this is a pretty common pattern I'll see where like in midnight in Sydney, it's like, what, 2 p.m.? Yeah, 2 p.m. in like London. So you're like, yeah, okay, Sydney's 10 hours ahead. Oh yeah, no, I guess it makes sense. I think I'm just like psyching myself out, right? That makes sense, 13 plus 11. Yeah, I'm literally going crazy. So it's totally fine. I was very confused. So like, it's just London time, but you got to be really careful because the date library, and we had this, I think, last time we did this example in a lecture. It also has some weird things where like, it takes in days, like, you know, the 2nd is the 2nd, but when it takes in months, 01 isn't January, it's actually like February because the months go like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, like they start counting months from 0 as like an index. There's all these very confusing things. So one of the cool things about NodeJS and why it's so powerful is because what you'll see happen is that there are these libraries out there that people go and publish to NPM, and you should know what NPM is because you've seen the lecture or you're already familiar with it, like date functions, which is a really, really popular library. It gets about 33 downloads a second globally of people downloading this library onto a computer somewhere. And we can go and add it to our project if we want to. I can just go and copy and paste that. I can paste this in here. And what it has done now is it has gone and added that to my folder. In fact, it has created all the NPM meta framework I need, like the package.json and the package lock. It's also created a node modules. My editor's designed to ignore the node modules, but it is there. You can see it on the terminal. So that's all kind of installed now. So if I want to go and solve a problem with date functions, I can go and solve it pretty easily. And I can probably Google date functions, find time between two dates. Come down here, interval to duration. And you see one thing that's cool about the date functions library is it seems pretty happy to use. Actually, I'm going to try and, is it ChatGPT? Cool. So I'll give you a good example here. So like I can say, I have this code to find the time interval between two dates, right? But the problem is my input date is in the format YYY and not separated by numbers. A very innocent question to ask, right? Because like if you think about what we've been up to here, what you've seen on the terminal, it has been printing it out like this, right? So we can't just randomly decide to extract all the things out. You might be thinking, oh, I'll start splitting the string and I'll do that, but it's like, you don't really want to get into that because already you can look at the thing I just told you about, that's month 0 there, that's January. But the way people are inputting it as January would be 1. So now you're not only going to be splitting a string up, you're also going to be having to make look at the months and subtract 1 from it. And it just kind of gets out of hand. So I could ask that question. Hopefully they can infer its date functions, library. See, good example of a slide. Oh, wow, they literally just did what we said we were going to do. There you go, just reinforce that maybe there's not a better way to do it. I wouldn't always trust these LLMs. There can be instances where they're certainly less good, but sure, we can start with that. Is there no better way? Oh, they're just trying to avoid stupid. See? They had a chance to shine today and it just didn't. So what we saw was that, okay, you can take your process.argv, I'll split it up and say it's process.argvi.split on the that, and well, that's going to get split into 3 pieces now, obviously. So then I'll say, well, year is equal to split 0, month is equal to split 1, and day is equal to split 2. Now also here, because these are strings, I at least have to convert this one to an int if I want to subtract 1 from it, right? Because when I've split this up, they are just numbers. Now I can avoid that. I can not do that if I want to, but let's see what happens if I try and subtract. It probably just works knowing JavaScript. 22 minus 2 is 20. Okay, so JavaScript's a pretty loose canon of a language. It'll just kind of happily take your string as a number and convert it to a number and all these other kinds of things. But where JavaScript gets weird sometimes is that. There you go. This is like a real classic why purist developers hate JavaScript, right? You'll come across someone in your life, if you haven't already, who's like, you say the word JavaScript and they'll rip a bucket out from nowhere and like throw up in it, you know? And they'll typically be like maybe C programmers or maybe some other, like Python is a really common case of people who hate JavaScript. And they hate it because of that. They hate it because it doesn't make sense. Because when you add 2 to the string 22, it upscales the int into a string and then concatenates it. But when you say minus, it turns it into a number. Now that kind of makes sense because A plus B is defined as concatenation. So you can add 2 strings together and it concatenates. But I don't think there's any definition for that. There's no idea of subtracting 2 strings together. So basically JavaScript is like, well, I will always try and promote integers to strings where I can, you know, because they're a more versatile type. And there's a definition for adding 2 things, so I'll do that. But in the minus case, it's like, well, there's no point promoting the 2 to a string and then subtracting it and getting a nan. So very strange rules. But the point is it will work in that case because it's minus. But, you know, I added that just to be sure. And then I can print out year, month, day, see what happens now. I get 2003, 2, 3. That makes sense because February we want to be 1. Bit of a nightmare, but we will still see how we go. I will grab this here. I will paste this in like that. Let me just go fix up all these tabs. Messy, messy, messy. Start and end. Now in JavaScript, if I want the end date to be now, I can just say new date. A new date by itself will just be now. And for this one, I will pass in the year, the month, and the day as arguments. And now, will this work? No, it won't work because I'm not importing something. And you might be like, gosh, what do I have to do for this? Another great example. How do I import that from date functions? Now, I hope you never get to a point. You know, typing this in is kind of like being that kid in high school that gets to the point where you're like putting in 9 plus 12 into a calculator. You know, when you're just using the calculator so much in math that you start forgetting how to do basic stuff. And you're like, oh, okay. Now, I'm not saying everyone just knows that off the top of their head, but oops. How do I stop that? No.
Hey,
no.
I'm ready to hit the ground.
Leave me alone. Please, just don't. Okay, so I have to import that now too. Well, there's that library. Now this only works because I've npm installed it, naturally. So now when I run it, I get, oh, cannot use import statement outside a module. So here's another tricky thing about NodeJS. NodeJS has developed rapidly over 10 years. Lots and lots of different steps. In Node, you will see old import syntax and new import syntax. The old import syntax looks like this. However, at some point, people decided that it looks kind of ugly and it'd be really nice if we could have something similar to what Python has, where you have this nice little import structure here. So they did go and update it. In this particular case, I am going to have to use the old import syntax, but it can be pretty easy to avoid otherwise. So I got my interval. I'm going to go and print it out. There you go, years 22, months 7, days 22, hours 18. And it's like, well, that's useful, but I want to know how many days have passed. And again, if you're kind of like a real passionate, nerdy programmer, your next thought's going to be, I know, I'll just multiply years by 365 and months by this and this by that. But that's obviously not going to work because that's complicated, right? You got leap years, you got all these, like each month has a different number of days, and it's like, so who really knows what to do there? So what we might do instead is we'll go back to our date functions library docs. Library docs can always be useful to go through. I might search up days. I might search up days between. Difference in calendar days. Difference in full days. I always thought this one was interesting because it's like difference in business days makes sense. Difference in calendar days makes sense. And difference in full days is yet another nuance. This is why I can pay to read the docs. And what that means is, you think about it for a sec, it's like between 1 a.m. this morning and 11 p.m. tomorrow, I think. I'm trying to figure out how this works. No, sorry. And between 11 p.m. tonight and 1 a.m. tonight, right, 2 hours later, that is like one whole calendar day apart, you know, because the calendar's changed. But it's no full days apart because it's only been 2 hours, you know, so that's why those things are different there. Now, I could grab this difference in days, and that one looks like it just takes in, later date and earlier date, and it's just a different library. So I'll grab that, replace that. What do they call it? Later date, earlier date. I obviously got them the wrong way around here. And we'll try that out now. Nan. What have we done wrong? Oh, sorry. See, just a different library. They don't want the keys there. They just want the two arguments. Okay, so we got 8,270 days, 7,876, and 7,478. That sounds interesting. So we've done that little part now. Interval in days, for instance. Next part says creates a list of key value pairs that stores the date and then the days since date. So basically the string of the date to the days since the date. Well, okay, I can go and make myself an object at the very beginning of the program called map or something like this. And then here I could say map, I'll add a new key, and that new key might be process.argvi. To make this clearer, I might call this like date string, just to ease out, you know, how readable that is. And I'll say, yep, there's a new key in my object or my dictionary, which is going to be the interval in days. And then all I have to do at the bottom of the program now is print out the map, and hopefully we're adding to it as we go. There are dates and the days since then. And then the last part is outputs this to a JSON file. Well, now that I have all of that, I could simply go and say, I want to open a file called dates.json. I want to write the JSONified version of map to that. And I do need to add, I think it's a flag. Is it flag? I can't remember. Something like that. And I do need to import file system. I just went through that last bit pretty quick. But I did go and create a file called dates.json. Now, I like this little programming example because the purpose of it is it kind of just gives you a little bit of a sense of Node.js and playing around with it, right? Like there's obviously some JavaScript elements there. There's playing with the date as well. You're importing something. You're dealing with NPM, obviously. You're also using the NPM library. You're doing another couple of imports, and yeah, it's not the hardest example in the world. Put your hand up here if you're an undergrad. Just so I have a rough sense of it. Okay, that's good. That's helpful. Any questions about this example before we move on?
While we use the map, can we use the object to create a list for the certain requirements?
What do you mean by create an object?
Like the key. I don't know. Is that object like the key and semicolon and then the data?
Yes. Yeah. So we're basically doing that here. It's just like this is just us adding things gradually. And what I mean by that is you can.
Yeah. I thought that is a map data structure.
Oh yeah, where it gets confusing in JavaScript, in the newer versions of JavaScript, there's actually a type called map.
I thought that was like the map type.
Yeah, and it's a good, yeah, I understand why you'd think that. So it's like, there's this thing called map, which looks really similar here called new map, and it's basically a little of an abstraction of a JavaScript object. I thought it was really cool when I first saw it and I started using it a bunch because it's got a few more protections in it and it's just a little easier to work with. But one of the biggest downsides, I think, of map is that it's not, at least as of 2019, when I last looked at it, it wasn't JSON serializable very easily. So it's like you couldn't JSONify it, if that makes sense. And being able to JSONify things is actually pretty important in general, I find, with a lot of like development stuff. But definitely not all the time. Cool. Any other questions? Yep.
I just found on ChatGPT that there's an inbuilt format function in data types. Could we have used that instead of the manual calculation of all the ones we
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, I know I keep doing this thing where I chat GPT stuff in the lectures, but like Shrey's just found that there's a proper way to do it where date functions will just handle that for you, you know. What's it called?
format?
Date functions format. There'll be something here pretty quick. Yeah, so this is a classic example. You see this Python has a function similar to this called like date string ftime. But it's basically where you go like, hey, here's my string, my raw version. Here's the structure of the string. And I think here's like the reference data. You don't even think you need that. Oh, that's just saying I want it to turn into a date object. So this would be the proper thing to do as opposed to do all that subtract 1 off the date and things like that. Whenever you can use libraries to solve problems, it's really good. And in fact, what's so interesting for a lot of you is that, particularly in weeks 7, 8, 9, 10, you'll probably never have a chance to use so many libraries when programming as you will with JavaScript stuff. It's just so dense, full of modules and things you can download on the internet. I think, like, not to jump too far ahead, but it's like stars select or something. Like, there's so many, I don't know if this will be it, React. Like React rating stars or something. Yeah, so like there'll be these things online. You can kind of search for anything you want. And someone will just be like, here's my library for you, where you can go and just install that. And then you can you'll just straight away have something on your website where you can, give it a sec, where you can like choose the number of stars and things like this. Or change the shape. You don't have to go and build all of that. It's just, you can go, it's all open source. There's like more open source stuff than you could possibly humanly imagine. But that's more towards the React.js end of the course. Cool. Well, that was a little example. Not that one, obviously, but what we did on the terminal. Pretty cool. What I want to chat about second here is, because all that stuff, even if like you're not doing Node.js yet, me playing around with JavaScript there is a little useful for you, you know? Like, even though web JavaScript's a little different, just that basic stuff's pretty useful. But this next part is we want to make a really simple web server. Now, I'll try and show you this. So again, undergrads, I apologize. This is one part of the course you'll be a little bored in. But the most common server that you'll find in Node.js land is an Express server. There are different types of web servers that exist though. And the Express server looks like this. I can go and make a new file. I'll call it server.js, and it's just this little piece of code here. Now the only thing I need to install to make that work is Express, the library. Pretty simple. That's just me cloning another open source library into my Node modules folder. And the way the server is structured is you import the server, you create a server, you set the port of the server, you run the server down here on lines 9, 10, and 11. And on lines 5, 6, and 7 is me essentially saying, hey, when someone tries to access the URL Hayden sucks, or like, you know, the website / Hayden sucks, I want you to just send back hello world, like this. So pretty simple. Node server's running. I just made a web server. It was like all of like, what, 18 seconds or something? Could do it even quicker if I wanted to. And what it's running on is here, it's running on localhost port 3000. So localhost is the name of my computer. It's the name of all of your computers. And port 3000 here is the server. But when I access that, I get this error. And that's the web server library telling me you've tried to talk to me, but your URL is not a URL I'm familiar with. Right? And that's because there was a URL that it is familiar with. What's that called? Hayden, yeah. Hayden sucks. And there's the hello world right there. So that's a web server. And it's really simple to understand web servers because suddenly I could show you this. I'm going to create a page called home. I'm going to say welcome to my crappy site. And then I'm going to make another page called about, where I'm like, you know, I was born in another place, something random. And then you understand, and I have to restart my server because I've edited my code, is that now what happens is I have a website where I have a home page. And I also have another page here called about. And I have a couple of pages now, you know? And then what you get into is, you know what would be really cool is what happens if I say check out about. But what I do here is I actually make a little funny thing where I say, yeah, just go to the about, like that. Got to restart my web server again. But there it says, welcome to my crappy site, check out about. Then what happens is I go to another page. You know, it's like this is the fundamentals of what the earliest versions of websites were. It was people who wrote HTML and CSS on pages, but there was a web server underneath that was serving it. And sometimes the web server would serve dynamic content, right? Like a really good example is you ever go on a website, let's go back to UNSW again, and they don't really have it. I think it might be on my company's website. Let me see if it's at the bottom. There you go, Perla 2024, right? Oop. My goodness. So it says Perla 2024. Well, you know one way you can make that really easy. Imagine if at the bottom of my site, I'm gonna, you know, I'll do like a few BRs or something, and I'll say Hayden sucks, and I'll put a little copyright symbol because it would be funny. And then I will write something else here. I'll make this into a JavaScript string, and I will simply say, you know, new date, which is now .year, I think. I think that works. That's just saying get right now's date and get the year property of it. And didn't like that. What did I do wrong? Oop, no, I wanted that. Undefined. All right, let's play with this a second. Tuesday, September 2024. Year? Is it year? JavaScript date object get year. Get year. I hate languages. Get year must be a function. 124. What do I do? What? I should have. This is why you also read things. This feature is no longer recommended. Oh. Get full year. Okay.
Maybe you forgot the now date.
Forgot the what?
The date now.
Yeah, well, this is the annoying thing about the JavaScript libraries. They've they've got like, you can either get a new date, or you can do this one here. And it's obviously crazy, because if anyone's done object oriented, the first one is you instantiating a new date object, and the second one is calling a static function on the date class called now. And it's like, this shouldn't be that complicated to do multiple, like the same thing essentially like that. So now I've got a website where every time I load the page, the server actually generates some dynamic content and serves it back to the website. And again, I can go and put lots of fun stuff on my website if I want to. So for instance, I could go and put some more BR tags here. And I could do my favorite thing to slip into websites, which is I could put a marquee, and then I could go and put a font size 10 EM here. And then inside my gigantic marquee, I can go and put a big fat turd. And it'll be mildly funny, right? So there's a little dynamic website. And I like this example because it kind of helps you get a more tactile understanding of, like, where is the server playing here, and where is the content, where is the like client side playing? Because we often talk about the client and server, but you can kind of tell. The server is simply providing HTML and CSS and JavaScript to the front end. Now, where this gets a little confusing is 20 years ago, when all this web stuff, 20, 30 years ago now, when all this web stuff started out, the servers was rarely written in JavaScript, right? Like NodeJS is like 10 to 12 years old. It was always written in, like Java was the classic example, right? So I'm pretty sure, again, like a lot of Atlassian stuff was written in Java. And it depends in which era you go to. So like a lot of the 2000s, early 2000s, there was like kind of, late 90s, 2000s was a lot of Java. And then there was a period where PHP took over a lot of stuff, kind of in the mid 2000s and towards 2010. Python had a huge run for a while. You got a lot of big frameworks like Django, Flask was really popular. There's a lot of tail end of that. You'll still find a lot of web stuff built in Flask. Has anyone used WebCMS3 in CSE before for courses? It's like a CMS for courses, like course website. That's basically just this, except it's written in Python. It uses, I'm pretty sure it uses Flask. So it's just like a Python web server that's serving up front-end code. And nowadays, JavaScript's more common. The reason JavaScript got so popular here, again, and I made allusion to this back in week 1, is not just because people like JavaScript. It's because as you'll learn later, it's just really helpful being able to code in the same language across the whole stack. But it's important to note here, this here is a web server written in JavaScript, but when I add a script tag here that says alert and then I restart my server, that alert is JavaScript triggering that, but it's triggered in a different area, right? Like this is server code, this is JavaScript on the server that sent text to the web browser, which contained JavaScript, which the web browser then ran that JavaScript. So that's kind of how that whole life cycle there is completed. Yeah, that's really kind of it. Modern websites don't really do this as much. They'll typically like have one file. They'll typically send one file to the front end, and then that front end will run that one file the entire time you're on the site. But again, it'll be quietly talking to the server via an API behind the scenes. This is very old school stuff where like each page is a route and you load a whole new HTML file. Again, I talked about that back in week 1. Whereas again, when you're on Netflix these days, you'll be on the same page essentially. It'll just be very dynamic, and that's not what we're seeing here. A lot of simple sites like WebCMS3 are what you might call just like really simple template sites, where essentially the whole job is just to have a series of routes where each route reflects a certain page or section of the website. And when someone loads that section, the route will dynamically pull data from a database and then generate a page on the fly. So I don't really have the best example, but if I go to WebCMS3 here, maybe I can log in. We actually do have a WebCMS3 site for 6080. Tutors use it for a few things, but we don't really need it. But yeah, so there's this thing here, 6080. Do you ever see this? This is to get you away from it. So how this site works is that when I go to say, what's a good example? Maybe like edit course menu here. So like what happened is all this HTML was loaded up from the web server, but what it sent back to here probably was generated on the server. So the server would have talked to the database and said, hey, for this particular course, what are the menu items? And it said, here's the menu items, and then it generated all the relevant HTML that you might have seen. So if I go to inspect here, you'll see that there's bunches of stuff here. So I'm not saying that's exactly how it was done, but it's probably how it was done, is all that HTML might have been generated on the server by these template engines and then just sent back to the front end. So again, it kind of depends on the architecture. It's pretty funny, Web CMS3 in general. Do you have a favorite emoji, Shrey? Smiley face. One of my favorite powers that has been granted to me, which I don't know why, but it just entertains me endlessly, is I can actually change your names. I've never done this for Evil, but like, yeah. There we go. That's a nice and friendly. Whoa, okay. That was weird. Yeah. I've always thought it would be really funny just to like change someone's name or like swap two people's names. I can't tell you how intrusively that thought for years has like haunted me. Or like just delete someone's name or replace it with a dot or something. But, got to be ethical here. Yeah, so that's like Web CMS3, a fairly simple site. I'm going to do a little bit more with this. We're going to write some more JavaScript and get more comfortable with some strings and some other things that you might find useful for the next couple of weeks. And then at the end, I might really quickly touch on how things like React and whatnot work, because it might help you just complete this picture. Because again, today's a very background lecture. Next week, we'll get really hard into the really super relevant direct content again. So if I have a look at this server, the question that we were asked today was start up a simple HTTP server with one get route called scrape. OK, well, let's go and delete this stuff we've made here. App.get scrape. I'm just going to copy and paste that. Cool, and it says this route takes in a URL and a particular HTML tag to look for and count. This route returns a simple object with the number of times that tag appears on the web page. So they're basically saying, give us a URL, like a website, and an HTML tag like a div, and go count how many of them exist by scraping a web page. A fun little activity. So when it comes to GET requests, and again, this isn't core content, so I'm going to skim through this pretty quick. I can capture information from the URL by saying request.query. And I'm going to go console log query here, and you'll see this pretty quickly, that if I load up a web page, that poo is always funny. Such as like, and then I say like site equals google.com and tag equals div, that it loaded the, why is scrape still returning all the, sorry. Google.com and tag equals div. Now, oh, it doesn't return anything. OK, that's so interesting. So I'd actually never made that mistake by accident. So I was really confused there why when I was loading up the scrape page, it was like still showing me the marquee poo running across the screen. And the reason is because my web page there didn't actually return anything. So what that meant was the web browser was actually sending the request to the server, but the server just sent back nothing. So it wasn't going to go and update the page. It's kind of like, when someone gives you a link to a file download and it kind of like opens a tab and then instantly closes the tab because there's just a file download. It was kind of like that. But if I simply say response.send hi, now it'll be a little different and it will actually get rid of that. There we go. So there's my actual page now. And you see every time I'm requesting that page, it's sending the data in the URL, which is being captured here by the server. So then I think, well, OK, I want to get the text from a website. I'm going to jump ahead a few things here too. This is not really super. I'm trying to think if there's a JavaScript sync fetch. Is it? What do we use? 1531 students will be traumatized by this library. Sync fetch. So I'm going to go install a library called sync fetch, which will basically allow me to query a website if I want to. So if I go and then, where is it? Const fetch equals sync fetch. So I'll go and add that library here too. And then I will capture and say, yep, my site equals query.site and my tag equals query.tag. And I will go console or fetchy equals fetch. It's a terrible name. Site content equals fetch site. Let's just start off with that and see how we go. All right. Restart my server. Neither of those pages are what I want. Okay, there we go. So I ran that and it looks like it worked in that case. I kind of don't want that though. I kind of want the underlying data because I'm just getting a big response object, right? Because when you hear from a website, you're going to hear a bunch of stuff about status codes and there's going to be buffers and various other things. And I'm not sure if that'll be. This is also something I'd really love to just be like, here be like, no, I want the site content as a string, not as a response object. And it'll probably hopefully just give me a little adjustment. One thing I can't stand is ChatGPT having to like really step me through it with all the text. I don't know why. It's like, what an excellent question, Hayden. And then it just craps on for a while. So that's what I want, response.text, really easy. Okay, so I come back here and I'll just say, yep, that .text. Now obviously the .text part will break if there's Google's source code, right? The .text stuff will break if the underlying request fails, you know, because the response will come back with like a 400 or 404 or something, and the .text command might not work there. But I've got all that information there. Maybe I'll try something different. Maybe I'll try unsw.edu.au. There's the website. That looks a little more legible. Cool. So now we want to look up how many of tags exist. So that's really good that I've got the whole website in a string. Really easy to manipulate. If I gave you the entire web page's source code in a string, and then I also said, you know, pick a tag like div or something, how would you tell me how many divs exist on that page? What would you do? What would you write? Use those big brains. Yeah. I used to point to people years ago and be like, you answer the question. And then I just decided to stop being a monster. But don't make me become one again. I'm sure you have a naive idea.
Run a loop.
Sorry?
Run a loop all across the string and maybe count with the number of divs. Start a counter from 0 every time you find a div using the .test method.
.test method? Yeah, okay. So that's like down the regex approach, probably. So yeah, I could use regex for it. I mean, like, I'm sure some of you, I won't punish you again, but it's like, you know, if I gave this to you in an exam and you got like 5 minutes to figure it out, I'm sure some of you would have an idea pretty quick of how you do it, right? We can obviously say count occurrences in string JavaScript. That's one thing to do. What do we got here? .match. Okay. We've got that. This is using regex. Regex is also one of those things that I don't think is specifically taught in the core degree, but we can try it out. So there's my site content. I say count is equal to temp, in this case is site content, .match, and then we give it some regex here in between. I'm assuming that we can give it a string. I'll just try it out with a hard-coded div for now. We can see count. So we'll see how many divs exist there. Refresh our page. 0. That's not good. Probably screwed something up there. We'll try it without the quotes, just to make sure I didn't screw it up. Oh no, the quotes are ruining it. That's not good. Surely it's not the quotes. Yeah, I'm not too sure. Normally that works. Sometimes regex likes to be like that because, like, with the quotes, then it might be treated like a string or something. I didn't use the match command a lot. I could probably figure that out pretty quick in a minute by Googling it, but I'm interested in exploring other ideas first. Let's imagine this didn't exist. How would you try and find it? You can Google stuff on your laptop. I don't mind. Just help me out. Come on. Don't be the least creative cohort of 6080 in history. Yep.
Could you, like, instead of fetching the text of the website, could you somehow fetch all the elements as objects and check if the elements can be?
Could I fetch all the elements? That's a good question. So instead of getting it as a big piece of text, you mean like, can I get it as some kind of structure or as an object? That's a great idea. I don't know if you can, but I love the idea because like that would solve the problem a lot if you get some kind of structure to it, you know, and then just like count up those structures. I don't think it's possible. It might be. So that's a good idea. We've got like idea 1, regex idea, try and see if there's a way to get the object in a more readable structure, because the text is a horrible way, so that's good. Another really simple, naive one, usually it's the first one everyone suggests, is just to split the string up on the div, right? So we know with strings in JavaScript that we can split it up with some element, some delimiter. What if I just split it up with div, like that? So I take my big fat string, I take all the divs, I split it up, and then I count that. Okay, and that's one way to do it. Now, obviously, we're going to get a fence post error there, because if there's one div, how many strings is it going to split it into? 2. If you got 2 divs, it's going to split it into 3. So I need to take 1 off that. Got to be careful there. What if there's no divs? I'm going to get -1. So we'll get our new favorite friend, math.max, 0 and that. That'll take care of that part. 721. But what's the problem with this still? Where have I snookered myself in this approach? End tag, right? So for every div, there's meant to be a closing div. So I'm probably double counting these now. This isn't really specific content here. This is just like kind of problem solving together. How would you get around that? Let's use this method for argument's sake. What would we do to avoid double counting? /div. Yep. That can work. I love this example because I can keep devil's advocating this down. What's wrong with that approach? There's a couple of things I could see going wrong with it. I shouldn't say approach. I should say that specific string. What are some problems with that specific string? The case. I actually wasn't even thinking of the case. The case is definitely a big one, right? So we're going to have a problem with the case. One really easy way around that could be that if we go, forgot to do that, I could take site content and I could actually go site content to lowercase, I think. Is it to lowercase? I think so. Yeah. So that's one way around that one, because otherwise splitting up in lowercase, the regex you could get around that with, you know, case insensitive regex. So the case is a big part. There's also the other thing. I'm pretty sure like that's valid div. So let's go find my HTML page here, right? The one I created really early on. Let's say I go and make a div. Let me just drag it back in here. So there's my div. I want to see. Let's give it a background of blue, because if it doesn't come up blue across, we know we broke our div. So I'm going to go and try and break the page. Okay, that still works. I don't even need the closing tag. So the page could work without any closing tags at all. That's a problem. Secondly, if it does have a closing tag, what happens if they mess around with it? Okay, that's also problematic, right? So what this kind of comes to is if we just think about it and we try and wargame it against ourselves, the closing tag's a really hard one to rely on because people can butcher it and it might still not be there. So then you think, okay, well, what's the better one? Probably the opening tag. The opening tag's really interesting because with the opening tag, if I make it blue again, there's only so much they can do before it stops working. For instance, if I put a space there, it doesn't work, you know? So what do I probably put in? I'll kind of stop making you suffer through my questions. Probably the most reliable thing would just be a div with no space after it there. Though, I don't know if there's a tag. Is there any tag that starts with div? that has like division or something? I don't think so. But you'd also have to rely that someone isn't like including other code. Because for instance, somewhere on the page, you might have a span somewhere where someone says like, pop div, like that. I think that'd work. What did that come up as on the page? Pop. Okay. Not happy. So that one seems pretty safe. But, just breaking down the problem, trying a few different things out with it. So that one seems pretty reliable. I'll go restart my server. I'll come back to my page here, and it says that there's 358 divs still. So the end tag was pretty reliable. That just shows that this particular website, unsw.edu.au, is fairly well constructed. If I go compare Google, Google's got 10 divs. How many spans does Google have? 10 spans, a little bit suspicious. A tags. Image tags, 10. Oh no, I hard-coded div. What a tragedy. Got to fix that up. Tag. There you go. A bit suspicious for a bit there, wasn't it? Okay, one image. How many divs? 10. Oh yeah, of course, because we did div. Yeah, so there we've played with that a little bit there, and that's kind of our second example for today, right? Is there anything people want to dig deeper on the topic of Node.js or any of that? I don't really like spending a ton of time on it because of how not immediately relevant it is. So I have another thing I can show you which might just help paint the bigger picture of web development for you. But before we move on, is there any questions about that? Okay, so real quick then. How a lot of websites work nowadays. I want to use Netflix as an example. Netflix might have a page like this, the home page, and here will be all the HTML, CSS, JavaScript that you ever need for the entire use of the site. We talk about this way more in week 7. But how these modern websites that we learn about in week 7 work is they're essentially an express server that when you just try to access the home page, or basically any URL typically, what it will do is it will go and give you the same packet of information for the whole site. We call these single page apps, and again we talk about them more later on in the course. And there's actually not as much that happens in terms of serving web pages to a site. What does happen though is that the web server's full of a lot of routes like API get user and other things. So, say again, I'm making the Netflix site. I might have something to get the user. I might have a URL called like pause video. I might have something like play video, next frame. This could kind of go on forever. Prev frame. Might have one that's called like video list, and inside that we might have some information like search query equals request dot query dot search query, where like the web page someone's like put in some kind of search query like they're looking for house of cards or something, and that'll get passed through all the time. And meanwhile, Netflix, which is just acting like one page, so that one page loads up. So think of Netflix as a single HTML page with everything there. It's just constantly talking to the web server behind the scenes. So nowadays, web servers don't act a lot like Web CMS 3 does, where the web server is normally a collection of different pages where it's generating templates on the fly, and it's more like the whole website's one page with all these API calls under the hood. Sorry. How things like React work, which is getting into my last part, because that just kind of contextualizes the web server. We're going to use a specific type of library to make React. Just trying to remember if it exists. But I'll just make it in a subfolder. Call this front end. We don't have to worry about any of this till week 7. Is it Vite create? I don't remember. Ooh. Create Vite. Sure. make it in this folder. This folder. Yep. So if you, like, when you go make a web page with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you just write the code, right? You just write the code by hand, basically, and then you run it in the web browser. When I go and make a library like a React thing, what happens is I actually work with it in the terminal. So all this stuff I'm doing right here is all Node.js. I'm installing lots of different libraries, and then I run this other thing here. And what it does is when I go to this URL, it actually is now a website. So I've created a website here on my computer. And what's funny thing is about the website is if I go and inspect it, it looks like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And what's actually going on here for a second, so I'll show you it. It's fairly kind of, I wouldn't say straightforward, but you got to think about these libraries like React and Vue and Angular. They are written in this language called React, which looks a lot like JavaScript to some extent, but web browsers don't understand it. If I was to take this whole piece of code here and just paste it here and try and run it on my web page, it would be an absolute nightmare, wherever that is. Did I close it? Okay. Let me see. Page, there it is. Page.html. Now it's tried to interpret some of those things there, like buttons and stuff, but it's really struggled because it doesn't understand this code. There's nothing in the web browser that understands it. All the libraries that we've installed with Node.js understand it. And what we do as developers is that we actually go and compile our code, and what it does is it goes and outputs it to, is it there? I just have to double check. Yeah, it goes and outputs it to this folder here called dist. Now here's what's interesting about this folder called dist. Now it's not exactly going to work for us at all, but CS6080, week 3, front end dist. Let me drag this in here. Yeah, it's not going to work for us. But here's the thing. I'll go inside the dist folder. Think of the dist folder like the output, right? Like when you compile code, you normally get a binary. In this case, we're getting a bunch of files. I'm going to go and run a little web server in here. The web server is just a static file server. So what I mean by that is like all it's doing is just like quite literally serving files. So here, if I look at the source code of this page, that looks really similar to this, right? That's the source code. It's just loading it up. If I go and have a look inside this folder here, assets.index, that actually looks really similar to this file here. Except obviously it isn't word wrapped, so it won't look too similar. But that's the file there. It's the same file. So what these libraries like React and stuff are doing is they are magical React code over in Node.js land, and they are built or compiled, and they output a folder like this dist folder that outputs really old school JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So for years and years and years, people would basically write websites by hand, is one way to think about it, a lot more by hand than normal. Like this stuff over here, it wouldn't look so gibberishy, but it would look like this. And that's what your assignment 3 is on. So through weeks 4, 5, well, kind of 4, through weeks 5, 6, 7, you write websites by hand, HTML, CSS like you have in assignment 1. You just do it with JavaScript 2, which helps you understand the fundamentals. What does a web browser actually understand? You know, all the code you write in assignment 3 can be run directly by a browser. Whereas when we get to assignment 4 and we learn about React, we learn about this kind of magical language that deals with Node.js that compiles across to what you do in assignment 3. That's the background of all of this today. So again, I know I haven't left you with a great deal of actionable skills necessarily that you'll go and put into your assignment tonight, but I hope I've given you a bit of the kind of big picture of how all these pieces fit together is the main thing. That's kind of all that I had on my agenda. I try not to make these lectures longer than they need to be if they're shorter, but before you all start taking advantage of me sounding like I'm wrapping up, are there any questions or things we want to go through tonight? Because obviously if there are, I'm all ears. And we'll spend time on stuff. There's 2 questions already. Someone said in the Slido, do we use camel case for JavaScript? Yeah, so generally JavaScript is camel case like this. And generally CSS you'll see a lot is, what do they call it? It's like, it's not snake case or Pascal case. It's like, You know, like CSS is like the my funny name kind of thing. Oh, sorry, it's the wrong thing. CSS is like that text size, font size. I can't remember the exact name of that, but CSS is like that. So yeah, that's how JavaScript is. Someone said, is there anything like beautiful soup for JavaScript that and parse HTML into an object? I don't remember beautiful soup. Beautiful Soup's a Python package for parsing HTML and XML documents, including those. Probably, yes. So to your suggestion up the top before, like there's probably an NPM library that's like npm parse HTML page. So I really didn't dig into this too much, but you can see in this case, fast HTML parser. I don't know what it does, but you can see that it looks like it takes a string to your suggestion and it turns it into some kind of structure. And that could be interesting, and that's probably the best way to do it, because this library is probably very well maintained. If it's getting about, again, 3 downloads a second, every second of every day of every week of every year, it's probably very well maintained by people, and therefore you can rely on the correct interpretation of JavaScript. And then all you would have had to do is actually comb through it to like search through the structure to just find all the divs that exist in it. And maybe they even have library function for that, but I doubt that because that's not really core to what it's trying to do. So that's a good question as well. Any other questions? Yep.
So when you were installing the Weave template, it asked which framework you want to choose.
Yes.
You chose React.
Yes.
Whereas when you mentioned React, you mentioned that it's a library. Can you tell me what's the difference between a framework and a library in terms of React? It's a library or a framework?
Well, what is a library or a framework? I feel like other people would have better answers for this. But generally, I'd say a library is a set of tools. You know, like date functions is a great library. A framework is usually something with what I call like an opinion. So like React itself is actually like a language. You know, like it's a language structure that has a series of rules and things like that. But there are frameworks out there, like Vite is maybe not quite a framework. They might call it a lightweight framework, where it kind of might have a particular way that it's like, this is how we're going to deal with page URLs. This is how we're going to deal with like components versus pages. In Python, which a lot of you can probably relate to, there was a great framework called Django, which like, it isn't like, there is not, you know, it was like, this is how we're going to do certain things. It was like, here's my way of accessing a database. Here's my way of structuring pages. So a framework is someone just being like, here's my preferred methods for stuff. I packaged up really nice so you don't have to go and figure out how to do stuff. Express is a good example of probably what I would call a framework. I mean, it calls itself a framework. Like obviously it's a library because you install it, but it like has certain ways to read from the URL. It has certain ways to send stuff back. And someone in theory could be like, I don't think that's the best way to do it. Whereas I think date functions is a good example of a library because it's just tools. So that answers the question generally, but you started off asking about the command line and React and stuff. Did I answer all of it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I've read about this question a lot of times. A lot of people argue because you create a particular template for React apps, so you're following the same steps. A lot of people argue it's a framework.
Yeah, exactly. So like even though we learn React in the course, we're going to use something called Vite, which like the other frameworks, like the one I use at work, is called Next.js. And Next.js is like, so Vite and Next.js are both, they both are React, right? And it's very confusing because like sometimes it's like, sometimes people might be like React versus Next.js. And it's like, that doesn't really make any sense because Next.js is just a opinion on React. What I mean by that is that what Next.js is as a framework is it's people who have you can basically set up a Next.js project, which is a React project, but it has a bunch of built-in really useful tools. Next.js really prides itself on what they call server-side rendering. I think there's a lecture about it really late in the course. We use it a lot because the simplest explanation I can give you actually that's quite relevant is that the way that React normally works is that it creates these pages like this, where if you go and actually have a look at the source code, you'll notice that there's no actual like page here, like see all this text here, like edit source app and stuff. None of that's in the source code, because the way React was designed was it actually gives you an HTML page that's basically empty, and it uses JavaScript to dynamically generate everything after the page is loaded. However, a lot of people were like, well, there's kind of a problem with that, which is that when Google scrapes your website, it sees nothing. So if you want to make a website where there's a lot of content, it's really hard. So take like my company, for example. You know, I don't remember the exact thing, but like, you know, we can help people compare different types of securities. And it's like, see, we're like the third link here. So after, you know, Vanguard and Reddit, we're like the third link. And it's like, we're the third link because we have a lot of information on the page that if you go and look at the source code, there's actually, well, it's very like one-liney because it's still compiled in one line. But you'll see there's, in the mess of it all, there's going to be a lot of actual content there that Google sees and is like, oh, okay, I understand what that is. I know how to rank this page. But a lot of people won't like Next.js because they'll be like, everything in Next.js is like the Next.js way to do it. It's all just Next.js ways to do it. Something like Vite, which we use in the course, is really lightweight. What that means is there's going to be aspects of it that maybe aren't as cool out of the box, but it's just like less BS to understand. So it's like kind of classic case of being really simple. Someone asked, can we see the other website you mentioned at the start of the lecture? Yeah, I guess so. There's just a thing I've been working on. It's not particularly exciting, but it's basically, there's a lot of courses now that are using GitLab for lots of stuff. And it's just a really simple site that, so this is like an Express server here that's running. That's what we talked about in this lecture. And this is a React project that is built in React. I don't know if it'll work, just spooling it up like that. Probably won't. I was making a lot of changes to it on the weekend, so it's probably not going to be very, oh, maybe I'll try this. Yeah, I don't know. Let me go and shut one of the terminals. It's probably something running somewhere else. I'm not going to waste more than an extra 20 seconds on this, though. Yeah, look, that's all I'm going to show you because I don't think the login works at the moment. But it's just, oh, it does work. That's cute. It's just a little website where people can go and submit reruns and stuff like that. Yeah, it's not really working right now. So for example, your assignment 2, it's actually auto-marked, the compliance stuff. So for assignment 1, the tutor goes and manually looks at your page, you know, and then they assess it. For assignment 2, we auto-mark it. But the problem is with all these kind of auto-markings, people submit stuff and then there's slight errors in it, so they want to submit reruns, and then the reruns, someone needs to check it. There's like a whole process around it. So it's basically just like a website where any work that's auto-marked through Git is just going to kind of run through here. That's the plan. So it's just a bit of a random side project. I don't think it's that exciting though, because it's not that grand. Someone says, can we use Next.js in assignment 4 exam, or are we only allowed to use purely React? You can kind of use anything. It doesn't really matter. I don't think you'd want to though. Like we had a long chat about Next.js or Vite and other frameworks, and we ended up on Vite just because we were like, Next.js doesn't really have a lot that'll be useful for you, but you'll have to navigate some landmines because there's just more opinions to it. So sorry for turning a lot of this into kind of React today. I really don't want to scare you all with all these big concepts and ideas because you're just not going to see a lot of this content till week 7. You know, but I think the only, again, plus side of it is I'm hoping that at least talking about some of these at a high level means when you come to assignment 3, you'll understand a little bit more what's going on with the web server we give you that powers your front end. And also you'll understand more that assignment 3, you're writing code directly running, and then in assignment 4, you'll be writing code that generates code like you wrote in assignment 3, which I think is an important step or bit of understanding. All right, I'll take you out of your misery. That's all we'll go through today. Thank you for coming. It'll be a big, long, fun lecture next week, so get excited for that and enjoy the rest of your night. I'll see you soon.